Not literally, of course. People saw him every morning when they walked through the doors of Iron Summit, MMA gym in Detroit. They saw the mop in his hands, the gray bucket trailing behind him, the quiet nod he gave when fighters brushed past without a word. They saw the janitor. They just never saw the man. Marcus was 51 years old, built like someone who had once been powerful and simply never lost the frame. His hands were large and calloused, his shoulders wide beneath the faded blue uniform the gym provided. He arrived every morning at 4:30, long before the fighters came in, and he cleaned the mats with a care that bordered on reverence. He scrubbed the locker rooms, wiped down the heavy bags, mopped the entryway until it gleamed. He did all of this without complaint, without acknowledgement, and without ever once being thanked by anyone, except a 17-year-old kid named Darius. Darius Cole had started coming to Iron Summit 8 months ago, referred by a social worker who believed the boy needed structure. Before the streets finished the argument they had already begun with him. He was lanky, awkward, angry in that particular way that young men get angry, when the world has let them down repeatedly and they have stopped expecting anything different. The other trainers tolerated him. The fighters ignored him. But Marcus watched him from across the gym every morning and recognized something that nobody else seemed to notice. Darius was trying. Quietly, imperfectly, stubbornly trying. It started small. Marcus left a protein bar on the bench where Darius always dropped his bag. He never said it was from him. A week later, he stayed late to wrap the boy's hands properly after noticing that Darius had been doing it wrong and suffering for it. His knuckles raw and split in ways they didn't need to be. Darius looked at him with suspicious eyes the first time, the kind of look that asks, "What do you want from me?" without ever saying it out loud. Marcus just said, "Tighter on the thumb, loose on the fingers," and walked away. They built something in those quiet margins of the day. Not a friendship exactly, not yet. More like an understanding. Marcus showed up. Darius began to expect him. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the anger in the boy's face began to make room for something else. The trainer who ran Iron Summit was a man named Brett Calloway. Brett was celebrated in Detroit MMA circles, a former regional champion with a shelf of trophies and a mouth that never let anyone forget it. He trained serious fighters, charged serious money, and operated with the casual cruelty of someone who had never once been held accountable for his behavior. He snapped at the support staff. He humiliated beginners in front of the group. He had made 3 different receptionists cry in the past 2 years and considered it a point of pride that he ran a tough room. Brett barely knew Marcus's name. When he needed something, fresh towels, a spill cleaned up, the mats redone before an evening session, he snapped his fingers in whatever direction. Marcus happened to be standing. Marcus always complied. He was not a man who confused dignity with pride. He understood that the job needed doing and that Brett's opinion of him was simply not relevant information. What Marcus did not know until a Tuesday morning in late October was that Brett had been speaking about Darius to the other fighters and coaches, in terms that no 17-year-old boy should ever have to absorb about himself. He had been calling him a charity case, a waste of mat time, a kid from nowhere going back to nowhere. He said these things within earshot of Darius because Brett Calloway had never developed the emotional intelligence to understand that words thrown carelessly still land with precision. Marcus found out because he was mopping near the equipment room when he heard Darius's voice. Not the quiet, cautious voice he used with Marcus, but a cracked, breaking voice. The voice of someone trying to hold themselves together over a fracture that keeps widening. The boy was on the phone with his social worker. He said he was thinking about quitting. He said some people weren't meant for certain things. He said maybe everybody had been right about him from the beginning. Marcus set down the mop. He walked to Brett's office, knocked once, and stepped inside before being invited. Brett looked up from his phone with the irritated expression he reserved for interruptions from people he considered beneath him. He started to say something dismissive. Marcus spoke first. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply told Brett, with the measured clarity of a man who has spent years choosing his words, carefully because he cannot afford to waste them, exactly what he had heard and exactly what it had done. He talked about Darius the way you talk about someone worth talking about, with specificity. with evidence, with the kind of accumulated detail that only comes from paying close attention over a long period of time. He said that Darius Cole had shown up every single morning for 8 months. He said the boy had learned faster than any untrained kid Brett had ever worked with, even if Brett hadn't been paying enough attention to notice. He said that one person in this building actually believed in that kid and that it had nothing to do with being a trainer, having a certification, or running a program. Brett laughed. It was the wrong response, and somewhere in him, even he probably knew it. He told Marcus to get back to his mop. He told him that his opinion on fighter development was about as relevant as his opinion on rocket science. He told him, and this was the moment the room shifted, that maybe the reason Darius was going nowhere was because the only person mentoring him was a gym cleaner pushing 60. The other trainers heard it from outside the office. 2 fighters who had been stretching nearby heard it. Everyone heard the silence that followed. Then someone said, it was actually one of the senior fighters, a man named Ortega who had trained at Iron Summit for 6 years. Brett, why don't you 2 settle it on the mat? You've been telling everyone how fast you still are. It was a joke. It was supposed to dissolve the tension. But Brett, who could never resist an audience, looked at Marcus and said, sure, 1 round. Let's see what the janitor's got. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, okay. Nobody in that room knew what Marcus Webb had done before Detroit. Nobody knew about the 12 years he had spent as a competitive fighter in a regional circuit that no longer existed, under a name he had stopped using after a car accident took his left knee, and his momentum in the same winter. Nobody knew because Marcus had never told anyone. The same way he never explained why the mats were always cleaner than they needed to be or why he wrapped hands with the confidence of someone who had wrapped his own 10,000 times. The round lasted 47 seconds. Brett came in fast and aggressive. The way he always trained his fighters to pressure an opponent early, Marcus moved with an economy of motion that made several people in the room go suddenly quiet. The way you go quiet when you realize you are watching something that exists outside the category you had placed it in. He slipped the first combination without appearing to rush. He redirected the second. And then, with a single right hand thrown from an angle that shouldn't have been available, he ended the conversation. Brett sat on the mat. Not injured, the punch had been controlled, delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly how hard was enough, but sat down hard, blinking, recalibrated. The room was completely silent. Marcus picked up his mop from where he had left it against the wall, walked back to the hallway, and continued cleaning. An hour later, Darius found him. The boy stood there for a moment, not saying anything, which was the way he communicated things that mattered. Finally, he said, "You didn't have to do that." Marcus wrung out the mop and said, "Yeah, I did." Darius nodded slowly. "Why?" Marcus looked at him the way people look at someone they've already decided is worth the investment. Because somebody showed up for me once when they didn't have to. And I remembered what it felt like. Darius came back the next morning. And the morning after that. And Brett Calloway, who was not a good man but was perhaps a more honest one after Tuesday, never said another careless word about him again. The mats got cleaned every day, same as always. Marcus Webb remained invisible to most of the people who walked through the doors of Iron Summit, but not to the one person who needed to be seen first.